And hello, everybody. Good morning. So I'm here just to talk to you a little bit about educational psychologists. So that is what an EP is. And I am an educational psychologist. I'm not currently working as an educational psychologist because I am General Secretary of the Association of Educational Psychologists at the moment. And you can hear by me saying educational psychologist, you can see why we shorten what our title is to EP. So I'm going to just run you through a little bit. I'm going to start with kind of what it was been like for me as an EP, just to give you a sense of, where we come from, our training, and also the work we do, and then have a space to really think about the wider picture. Okay, so kind of starting with my kind of personal story and then moving into a wider story. And just as Helen was saying, I'm going to primarily do mainly presentation at the beginning, and just in terms of thinking about the recording of the session for other people. If you do have any clarification questions, please ask those as we go along. I don't mind interruptions, but there is space at the end for discussion and longer questions, so people can you feel assured that you do have that available to you. Okay, so just to give you a kind of idea about my background, so I did an undergraduate degree in psychology, and I then qualified as a teacher. So I did a postgraduate certificate in education and then worked in secondary school as well as further education as a teacher, primarily English, but also psychology. Teaching wasn't really for me. I kind of found the relationship with my student, the sort of teacher student relationship less to my liking. I think that the sort of power differential didn't suit me, so I kind of moved into something that was much more on a kind of equal level, more informal, and trained and worked as a youth worker. And subsequent to that, I then moved into the early years and managed a Sure Start Children's Centre, which of course not many of aren't so common anymore. But I had a total of 11 years working with children and young people, primarily in the education sector, but also in the early years sector, before I then applied to train as an educational psychologist. So in 2009, I started my doctoral training so for me, I trained at the Tavistock Clinic in London. And over 3 years, I then did a doctorate. And my training was quite varied. All of the courses are quite varied, and they are primarily funded by the Department for Education in recognition of the shortage of educational psychologists. And so I had a funded place, and I had a bursary, and it was quite a challenge, to be honest, even then. But I know a lot of trainee educational psychologists. So if you come across one, they might be called a TEP, which is a trainee educational psychologist. And a trainee educational psychologist is usually partly at their university and partly on placement in a local authority, and will be supervised by a qualified educational psychologist, quite heavily supervised, especially when they are in their earlier stages of their training. So my training was quite broad, and the Tavistock, they arranged it in a very specific way. In first year, we looked at individual children. In the second year, we looked very much at groups. And in the third year, we looked at whole schools. And I kind of share that with you because I think people don't always recognize how much EPs can do in terms of whole school systemic community work, and kind of really recognize and think of us particularly as assessors of individual children, which is is part of our role, but and quite a narrow one. And thinking about the kind of broad range of my training, so I looked at therapeutic work. So we had training in cognitive behavioral therapy, systemic family therapy was a big focus in at the Tavistock, because that is something that they deliver there. And my first year placement was in a CAMS, so a child and adolescent mental health service in Camden, that 1 day a week we were based within a CAMS setting to be kind of delivering that work. We also had a lot of training in something called consultation, which is a core skill for EPs across the board, and that is using techniques. So often in local authorities you might be offered a consultation with an educational psychologist, and that isn't just a conversation. It is quite in-depth problem solving, bringing psychology, really thinking through a situation together with parents, carers, but also school staff, but sometimes also the young person, to think about what's going on, what's working well, what things do we maybe need to try differently and do differently. And there's using lots of different techniques, so very much active listening type skills, for example, from counselling, but also things like reframing, which is kind of bringing a different perspective to that information, but also very much the solution focused ideas as well. Another key part that we did, and I mentioned it in my third year, we looked at whole school, whole system work, and which EPs call systemic work, that idea of looking at a whole system. So for example, it might be an early years setting, a preschool, it might be a kind of unit within a college, it might be a year group, or it might be a whole school, that we kind of think about what could be improved and what could we do around this using psychology. So, examples in my training, I looked at a school and did a project around their behavior policy and did some interviews and work with the teaching staff, the head teacher, the students, and then supported the school to really think about how they could do some better work with their school around behaviour. The group work, I worked, so when we think about groups, education EPs, I was trained to do, how to manage a group, not just in terms of group of students, but also providing group supervision, so guidance and support to groups of adults. So for example, teachers, teaching assistants, emotional literacy support assistants. So working in a group and providing that support. And of course, as I mentioned, there is still the focus on individual work, but thinking about assessment, thinking about standardized assessment, but also recognizing all the different forms of assessment that are available to EPs. So, that sense of there may be an expectation, for example, of something like an IQ test, but there's so many other forms of assessment available to an EP once they have trained. So, for example, observation can show, can give quite a lot of insight to a psychologist. Conversations with the young person, with the people who know them very well. The consultation I mentioned, that is very much an assessment tool that EPs will use. We also use things like dynamic assessment, which is a process through which we also do some teaching with the young person while we are kind of assessing them. So not just measuring where they're at, but thinking actually what can we do to help them move forward. So lots of different assessment techniques, but also, as I mentioned, some intervention techniques as well. So therapeutic techniques, as well as support sessions around developing social skills, etc. We also, because it's a doctoral training, we did learn about research methods, and we did write a thesis, and that is consistent across the board. So all EP training at the moment is at doctoral level, so they will all be doing research and writing a thesis, and that's important because that can really help in terms of supporting schools and supporting education settings to improve their practice, but also make sure that we are evidence-based, so that when we are doing things and when we are making recommendations for individual children or to a setting, that it is based in the research, so we can understand what research means. So that's a little bit about my training. And as I said, each individual course will do different things. So there are courses across the country, including, I think most of you are from England, but there is a course in Cardiff and in Belfast as well, and Dundee in Scotland. So there are training provided across the country. So in terms of what I did as an educational psychologist, so once I had that training, what then did I do as an EP? And this is a very long list because there are so many things that EPs actually can do. So therapeutic work was something that I really valued and really enjoyed doing because that mental health is a real interest of mine. But the thinking about mental health, it wasn't just about providing therapeutic work. When I'm thinking about mental health, I might work with an individual young person around, their anxiety or their mental health or a kind of bereavement, but also thinking about how do I support a member of staff who is working with a young person around their mental health, or how do I support a group of staff in a school or in a setting or a college to think about mental health better, and also providing training. So for example, I've provided training to whole staff teams. I've provided training to parents and carers within a secondary school, for example, on anxiety. That's an example of training that I've delivered around mental health. So that sense of one thing, like mental health, might involve lots of different tasks from an educational psychologist, from an EP. And mental health is not the only kind of training I delivered, so broad range of different training, all from, psychologically informed, all evidence-based. But for example, thinking about autism, neurodivergence, attachment was a big kind of element of my training delivered to school, trauma-informed approaches, relational approaches to managing and supporting behavior, um, things like precision teaching, which is a specific intervention in terms of helping, for example, a group of students to boost their literacy skills. I did do training around dyslexia, around memory, how that impacts education and accessing learning, school readiness, for example. And as I said already, I've delivered training in schools, in alternative provisions as well, in a college, and also with social care. So with my last few years as an EP, I was working partly in a social care team, children's social care, and so providing some training and support to foster carers, adoptive parents, and also social workers. I also had involvement in a number of different projects. So, for example, developing something around resilience, and then developing kind of practices and programs of delivery within primarily schools. But also I was involved in an NHS funded project in a local authority around neurodiversity, raising awareness, and then developing individual profiles of strength and difficulty and what works for individual students, primarily around transition phase, so preschool into infants into year reception year, or else kind of year 6 into secondary phase, so that there was a kind of almost a passport or a profile so that people could better understand the individual student and therefore meet what they needed. And I was also involved in delivering the Wellbeing for Recovery program, which was funded by the Department for Education and was then very much around that post-COVID, post-lockdown re-entry for students going back into school. I was involved in different kind of, as we call them, so that systemic work, so school improvement work. So how to engage students. I did, sort of train some students to do their own research around pupil belonging and pupil engagement in the school. I mentioned already resilience and kind of attachment awareness, but also kind of really thinking about how a school might think about behavior and understand behavior de-escalation techniques, those sorts of things. Person-centered work was something that was very important to me as an EP, and using different techniques to kind of establish a kind of really a profile really about the person, and usually involving the person, but thinking in a quite a positive way. So I think EPs are often kind of called in when things are really difficult. And one of the really important things for us is to think about what might be going well, and also recognizing that this person will have strengths and will have interests and aspirations and a dream, and kind of using techniques to kind of really grow a kind of full picture, holistic picture of an individual young person, rather than thinking, okay, this young person has these difficulties, this is what they really struggle with, but actually thinking, no, this is a real person. Let's really think about everything about them and make sure that what we recommend for the support in school is not just about addressing their need and addressing what is difficult for them, but also enhances their strengths and kind of taps into what they find interesting and what really makes them tick. I've also, provided support to all sorts of different staff. So I mentioned the kind of school staff, but I've also worked delivering support within a residential children's home, using a project called Pillars of Parenting, which is thinking about how to provide support to children in care who are living in a residential children's home, but also, working with groups of staff, providing supervision. For another example would be what we call SENCO circles, where a group of SENCOs, so the special educational needs coordinators from a group of local schools, would come together, problem solve together with one or two EPs, and think about, share resources, share ideas, and do those sorts of things. But also on a one-to-one basis, providing what we call supervision, which is not what it means in the kind of outside world. It actually means kind of someone who can mentor and coach and think through difficulties, and provide solutions together. So that providing that one-to-one, at all different levels in a staff team. So I mentioned my work in children's social care. So I did do the training and support for social workers, foster carers, adoptive parents, but also providing that supervision to other staff. So a group of staff who were working with young people, adolescents particularly, who were either at the edge of care or in care, and potentially supporting them to return home. I've talked about consultations, so did many consultations in schools, over the telephone, through Teams, and particularly in COVID, but also that was with staff, but also kind of one-to-one consultation. So a lot of the first lockdown, for example, I was on the telephone talking primarily to parents, but some carers, about some really tricky things that were happening at home, and doing some problem solving with those individuals, and really say problem solving, but also some just holding them and listening to some really difficult times that they were doing. And finally, and obviously this is something that is really important from an EP, and often the thing that we are most known for, is doing lots and lots of statutory advice for education, health and care needs assessment requests. So when a request is made for an education, health and care needs assessment, if that is agreed, an EP must provide advice to the local authority, for the local authority that to then make decisions about whether to publish a plan and what goes into an education, health and care plan, so an EHCP, which I imagine some of you will know about. So just thinking more broadly, that is a little bit of a kind of whistle-stop tour of what I did as an EP over 10 years. So I'm sure I did lots of other things as well that I can't remember. But that sense of a really varied and really kind of broad spectrum of different things that I did, and that lots of other EPs do. And I was only one EP. Other EPs will be doing lots more. So, for example, there are EPs who are working in youth justice teams, in the mental health in schools team, so the MHSTs you may have heard of. Your child's school might have one, for example. There are EPs who are working in the NHS, who are working in CAMS. They will be providing coaching, so more formal kind of teaching and coaching supervision for staff, and as I spoke about, the training support sessions for parent carers, developing projects around, so for example, different things around, so for example, the projects around how to address different learning difficulties, how to support children in care, and provide, there will be local authorities where those telephone consultations, etc., continue. So it's really thinking, what I really hope you take away from today is that EPs do an awful lot, and they do things, do a really broad range of things. And one of the things I've just remembered that I did, and that lots of other EPs do as well, is responding to critical incidents in the community. So the critical incidents that I was involved in, so for example, there was a physical assault within one of my children's homes that I supported, but also supporting kind of deaths of staff, and then supporting the school in managing that. But more famously, the EPs were involved in supporting the communities following the Grenfell Tower tragedy, but also the Manchester Arena bombing. So EPs are involved in those kind of things that we call critical incidents. Okay, so I've been talking about this sort of really broad range of things that EPs can do. And in most local authorities, they will be doing a lot of that. But what actual work looks like for EPs at the moment is quite different to what I've sort of described, because of a narrowing of the role, as there are fewer and fewer EPs in local authorities, and for lots of various reasons, and an increase in the statutory work, as also due to lots and lots of different driving reasons, in terms of increases in requests for education, health and care needs assessments. So there's sort of a doubling. So, well, it's actually a 77.3% increase in demand around education, health and care plans, but fewer EPs, and we have to provide advice for all of those requests. So that is becoming very pressurized for EPs. And what we are most kind of, I suppose, sad about is that means we are responding to the requests for education, health and care needs assessments, but at the cost of preventative and early intervention work. And we know that if we can get in as early as possible, then we can, try and make sure that the support is put in place as early as possible, and potentially the distress and the escalation of need could be averted, and those children and young people will be more settled and happier in their settings. So we feel really sad that we are having less time to focus on early identification of need, providing that support for school. And also, when I first started working, I would usually know the individual young person when the request came in for an education, health and care needs assessment. I may have seen them once or twice, even 3 times. I know a colleague who's recently written advice for a young person that they knew all the way through infants and juniors, and now that young person was transferring to secondary, and at that point they were then writing advice, so that the education, health and care plan was then in place for secondary school, because their needs had been supported through it was an infants and junior kind of situation there. So that sense of, actually, if we are able, what we are really skilled at and really want to do is being involved early as possible, so that those young people get their needs met and are kind of happy, really, and thriving as soon as any difficulties arise. Some of the sort of later examples for me, particularly young people in year 11 who are no longer attending school because of emotionally based school non-attendance. And that feels really frustrating because, you know, that sense of those young people that I saw, I did wonder if I'd seen them in year 7, for example, when they started finding things tricky, could we have really changed how they were supported in school, how they were accessing the curriculum, and potentially kind of saved them and their families many years of really challenging times. So I've spoken about, you know, so I've mentioned a shortage. You know, I imagine, and I know whenever the metaphor as rare as hen's teeth has often been kind of said to me when people meet me. Oh, it's so wonderful to finally speak to you. You're as rare as hen's teeth. It's so hard to see an EP. And it shouldn't be hard to see an EP, but unfortunately it really is at the moment. So as I mentioned, there is a shortage. So there are EPs being trained. It is a 3-year doctorate though, so it does take a long time for EPs to get trained and get into the workforce. But the difficulty is there is also a significant crisis around recruitment and retention within local authorities because of the kind of increasing workload, and also because EPs are not getting to do that early preventative work that they value, that they're trained to do and can see results from, and that they are kind of feeling very much on a treadmill around providing statutory advices, which are most of the time really needed. But you know, we feel we'd much rather have seen the young people before that was necessary. And that, I suppose, the workload pressures, the morale issues, they've, you know, some local authorities are very, very understaffed. So those staff teams are doing double the work, covering for double the number of EPs that they should be there. And also kind of feeling the pinch around cost of living prices, around kind of very below inflation pay rates, similar to the NHS, similar to other public sector workers. You will be aware that nurses and doctors have been striking. EPs were on strike yesterday for the same reasons, to make sure that children and young people can see an EP when they need to, and to address the shortages, to address the recruitment and retention crisis. We are seeing that we need to have a better pay offer, because what EPs have the option to do, the same as nurses, is that there is a private sector where they can get paid better. And you know, when you're faced with a mortgage bill that's gone up, well, my mortgage bill went up quite a lot after the sort of trust situation last year, that then becomes quite challenging in terms of how do we pay that mortgage. And do I need to, a lot of EPs are thinking, well, actually, I could work part-time for my local authority and do some locum agency work to top up my salary and be able to then pay my bills and also manage my workload. So that is the tension that is being faced by EPs. But even without that problem, there is just not enough of us, which is why the training is happening. But I think we need to be training much more than we are at the moment. So at the moment, it's 204 in a cohort for one program. That's been extended for 2024. There will be an intake, and 2025. We don't know if there's going to be more after that, but that sense we still need much more coming into the workforce. But I think that's what's kind of really challenging in terms of where EPs are at. But it's also kind of really acknowledging that the needs are being driven very much by, for example, funding issues, schools not having the resources they well, from my experience, what they did have when I first qualified, in terms of additional staff, in terms of time for teachers to be kind of giving attention to children, young people with additional needs. So that funding issues is quite important. And also thinking about how local authorities are funded. So when I first started, there was time from the local authority that was given to schools for free. By the time within about 2 or 3 years, it was only traded. So the only free service that schools could access was either through the statutory process or through the critical incident process. And then if they wanted to have that early intervention work, schools were paying for EP time from the local authority, and that's quite a common kind of model. And it depends how much money does a school have to spare to pay for an EP. I imagine, they may be kind of at the moment paying for their concrete to be fixed instead. So that there's that sense of really financial challenges. But I think also with everything that's going on in the world, the cost of living crisis, the pandemic certainly didn't help, how challenging the curriculum is for young people, the pressures they're facing, increasing levels of mental health needs, all those things that sort of drive up of need when there are fewer EPs available and less funding in the system. I think that makes it much more challenging and driving up the work. So I think there's lots of reasons why it's so very challenging to see an EP, but EPs really would like to see the children and young people who need to see us, and which is why we're so frustrated at the moment. Okay, so thinking about what you can do. So in terms of if you feel that your child or your child needs to see an EP or is finding things challenging at school, I want you to know that what I'm going to suggest is not a blanket approach, because each local authority will work differently. So you will potentially need to find out exactly how things operate where you live. There are different models of service. So there might be what we call a core offer. So that is where the EPs provide work to the schools that's paid for by the local authority. So as I said, that's usually limited to things like statutory work. So that is the EHCP, things, annual reviews, potentially critical incident responses, but sometimes some areas might have, for example, a telephone helpline for parents and carers, or might provide kind of consultations that the schools can access. But some local authorities have a full core offer. It depends where you live. The traded offer is where schools will pay for a set amount of EP time to be delivered, and that how that time is delivered is usually negotiated between the EP and the SENCO ordinarily, in terms of what the priorities are within that school. So it might be around the training elements, it might be around staff support, but it might be also around individual children and young people. Okay. Um, the Another element of the statutory offer will be the responses to education, health and care needs assessments, but also tribunal work. So the local authority in a tribunal situation, the local authority might ask a local authority employed EP to provide evidence at a tribunal. So in terms of what you can do then is to I think the first point of call is to have a conversation with the SENCO of the school where your child is at, to find out how it works if you're not sure. You can also look online, because there should be a local offer published online, and educational psychology services usually give information on the web internet as well. So you can certainly Google, but I think the best way is to have a conversation with your SENCO, because if a educational psychology service does have a traded offer, your individual school may not have bought in time through the local authority. So you need to have those conversations. If your school is able to access an EP through a local authority, you could have a conversation about, could my child be added to the list, but also have conversations about what support is available to my child in school, because it might be that the expertise around what support is needed could be within the school as well. So kind of be open to having that conversation. So thinking about what support is in place, what additional support might be necessary, what kind of things is the school looking at in terms of of the support that's available, and if necessary, how can external advice, it might be an EP, it might be, for example, a speech and language therapist, it depends on the needs of your child, how can that extra specialist advice be kind of accessed. So also, for example, specialist schools might provide advice to mainstream schools around different elements of support, and there may also be other services in the local authority that might provide more specific advice in terms of what you're looking at. So, for example, a behaviour support team, or a special learning difficulties team, for example, depends on the local authority. So, but the best course of action is to have a conversation with your SENCO. And if you are kind of minded to, if you want to kind of raise the issues on a wider level and sort of ask why are there not more EPs so that my child can access one more easily, there are always the options around writing to your MP or your local councillor, kind of raising the shortage and sort of saying this is having an impact on me, or it might be something that's having an impact on the people around you. Okay, so that felt a little bit like a whistle-stop tour, but I really wanted to make sure people had enough time to answer any questions or to have a little bit of a conversation. So I did see something come into the chat, so I'll pass on to Sue.
Thanks very much. Yeah, we had a question from Jane, well, a suggestion really, saying she'd be interested to hear how parent care forums work in partnership with local educational psychologist services, and she's happy to share how that works effectively in her area and welcome any other models that are out there. So I just wondered if that might be something we could do.
So that sounds very interesting. I know so just in terms of directly, we have been involved in developing the local offer. So this is my personal experience, was having local offer, parents, carers involved in developing the local offer. I know in another local authority I worked in, the parent carer forum was very heavily involved in sort of the level above the educational psychology service. So thinking about the sort of children's services and the special educational needs service that the educational psychology service was within. So that was sort of at a higher tier, and there was a lot of co-production, particularly in response to a kind of Ofsted, problematic Ofsted, that kind of how to respond to that and how to improve that. And then that became, the parent carer forum was very heavily involved, but it'd be really lovely to hear from Jane and from others.
Yeah,
if that's possible, that would be great.
Great. Have I managed to unmute Jane?
You have. Hi.
Great. Okay.
Unfortunately, I can't get my camera on, but so I'm Jane from Rotherham, but I'm also the Yorkshire and Humber steering group rep for the National Network Parent Care Forums. Just put that out there. So in Rotherham about 13 years ago, we created something with our educational psychologist service. We're looking at the an inclusive program. I forget what it was called now. But we met basically, and hearts and minds met, and so we created something called Genuine Partnerships, we work with Contact on this around taking that out. But that has the four cornerstones of co-production, and what it's turned into is that the local authority commissioned this. So there's a whole range of tools and resources online that anybody can use and any local area can use for schools, for settings, for parents and carers. It's done in complete equal partnership, and I will put the links in the chat. But one of the things that's really come from that in terms of what you were saying about our parents, in our local parents, every month on a weekly basis, we have different practitioners and services coming to our virtual online drop-in. And once a month, that's the EP service, where parents can understand, because what we still hear, I don't want my child to see a psychologist. There's no wrong with him. And it's having that understanding of what an educational psychologist is and what they do. So yes, we do very much also as a PCF sit in the SEN board and in the strategic setup, but all that exists because of impact on our children and young people. So for us, at working closely with our educational psychology service, it's about how that works with in PFA, in preparation for adulthood, in meeting in schools, so that they've got a better understanding of what SEND support is and where how our EPs can absolutely share their skills and strategies, and they do. So that what that's turned into is a traded element of the local authority trading what we call genuine partnerships, which is the EPS and the Parent Carer Forum together to support schools and settings, but not just schools. We're across health and social care as well. And as I said, it has gone nationally, and we've been in a lot of local areas, and we've worked with on success measures and with contact as well. So all that's I'll put all those links in there. The other thing that it's kind of a plea as well. So one of the things that we said very early on with Sheffield University, who provide our doctorate course for EPs, is that we wanted to be part of that selection process, so that parents are on that panel, and the parents are empowered to be on that panel, and young people too, so that the EPs that are coming into our northern region through Sheffield University have some understanding of what it's like for families, and to make sure that those cornerstones of effective communication, welcome and care, value and include, and partnership are in. And I'm not sure what the other things are, but it's a bit of a plea to anybody out there who is in Yorkshire and Humber in a forum, who is willing to, that it is paid, the university pay for it. If anybody is willing to be part of that selection process, because it happens year on year, and there are hundreds of applications come through every time, and it's again making sure that we're working in that partnership. So that's a bit of a whistle stop tour of what we're doing. And what I'd really like to know is, because I know for us, in terms of partnership with local authority, the EPS is the absolute link and cornerstone. It's the solid base that we work from, and the skills that they bring and they empower us with as well, doing joint workshops, bringing that stuff to families, advocating for your child, all the things you've mentioned before about that you've delivered, but empowering us as PCF to do that too means that it goes further and it goes wider, particularly through our communities who are underrepresented really as well. So it's giving us a real link into that as well. So I would really encourage anyone really who's on the call to get in touch with their EPS, and I know we all have different relationships, but also to share some of because this is it's all free, and as I say, I will put it on the link. I'm going to shut up now because I can see that Ros has put something on that again, and it's more of a national question. But if anybody does have any good practice, I think we at NMPCF would be really pleased to hear that, and how we can build on that, because it is a very mixed bag. We know from our neighbouring authorities, it's not that they don't have the same relationship. So how can we embed this into systemic practice, and not it just be a potluck thing of who we get. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jane.
Yeah, Jane, that sounds really brilliant, and I know EPs would love to be working in that way. Co-production is another core tenet of how we work. So co-production and person-centered practice, very much so. And I think also you kind of highlighted the preparation for adulthood, and I think that's also something I didn't mention and should have. Thinking about how do we support young people, because we work up to age 25. Making sure young people are equipped for adulthood is a really key component, and kind of acknowledging that parents and carers are key in developing that, but that really systemic, embedded, established partnership, genuine partnership sounds fantastic. I've written it down so I can look it up. Sounds great.
There was another comment in there that we haven't read out yet, about many of our local schools are academies rather than LA maintained, with budget stretched budget stretched schools may not be willing to spend in this way, is there any work being done by EPs nationally to try to encourage schools using the service more?
So nationally, the Association of Educational Psychologists is very much sort of making sure there is a kind of awareness raising around what EPs can do and what they can contribute. I think there is a big challenge around what schools spend their money on. So I know I've worked as an EP within academies or multi-academy trust schools, as well as maintain schools, so that is available to academy schools in terms of them buying in EP time. But it's about having those conversations at a national but also at a local level around actually what the EP service can do for those schools. And I think that sort of marketing, we're not natural marketers as EPs, but we do our best in terms of trying to make sure schools understand what they might be missing out on. I think it is really challenging at the moment, though, because kind of choosing between having the advice on how to use a learning support assistant, for example, or having the learning support assistant. Those are some of the choices that schools are making. So we are definitely doing our best to raise awareness of what we can do, but the funding dilemmas are quite challenging to address, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you. I think we've got a question from Nasheen. Are you out there?
Yeah,
I think
I am.
Oh, you are. Great.
Yes, I am. Hi, everyone. I think
Hi.
is my camera not working? Okay, so I was going to give an example of actually some good practice with the EPs. So we actually run branches. It's like a workshop every month. Once a month we do an evening time. Once a month we do a morning time, and we actually call the EPs every like 3 to 6 months, depending on how busy they are, and they actually come out and meet parents. And I think the first time they came out, they were so overwhelmed because they were like actually stuck behind the desk all day doing reports, meeting the parents, and it was so nice for them to just come out and actually just ask general questions that parents had, and we call them every 3 to 6 months whenever they can, and they actually love it, and they'll give us feedback that firstly they'll say, what do we need to ask, or are there certain questions we want to ask. So it's nice that they actually come out, and they actually, I think, hesitant at start, but when they've come out, they're like, actually, we've actually enjoyed it. Just trying to put the feel. And then actually with the recruitment question, I was going to say that we are actually in Swindon, and we're actually heavily involved in recruitment across the council with any kind of recruitment that goes on with Swindon Council, whether it's EPs or anything like that. We are actually involved as a PCF, because I think it's very, that they need to understand that element is always going to be there with the send, and the person in the job has to have that element there. So I just wanted to share our good experience, really. Thank you.
Sounds good. Yes. Now I've really enjoyed. It was more on a school level, kind of going in for coffee mornings and meeting parents and having those kind of informal conversations and being available in the community. So I can fully understand, Rasheen, why those EPs really love being in a forum and having just having conversations. That's I think what we'd love to be able to do, in terms, if we had the capacity to be in the community very much. That is something that we would love to do, and really good that parents and carers are on interview panels, I'm guessing, and sort of involved in recruitment.
And I think it's more like what Jane said, it's breaking down those barriers where parents have that conception where they're just doing the job, they're writing a report, but actually meeting them face to face, away from that appointment. Is just nice to just meet them actually as a professional, they're just as human as everybody else, and just having that chat really and getting to know them, so they're not as afraid to actually be hesitant. Oh, actually it's not as bad. I think it's definitely breaking down barriers for them. Thank you.
Yes, I kind of appreciate that, because the sort of professional status, the sort of head shrinker kind of, there's perceptions of EPs, that I think the psychologist term, but also I suppose a potential power differential of, professional and parents. And I believe as soon as an EP meets a parent or a carer, and young people as well, I think that disappears quite quickly. That is very important to us, that, we're all on a level here. We're all bringing a different level of expertise into the room, and that's part of our core training, really, and building those links. So absolutely, breaking down those barriers is really key.
That's great. We've got another question from Wanda. I'm not quite sure why we're not able to allow people's cameras, Helen. I don't know if there's anything we can do about that. But Wanda, are you able to speak?
Hello.
Hi.
Hiya. Yeah, I have a few questions if possible. The first one is, should an EP be at the EHCP reviews?
So the challenge, so like the annual reviews, so they will be invited if there is a particular reason for EP involvement to be there. So I think it's a capacity issue. It would be helpful if we were more regularly involved in annual reviews. I know, for example, came to a young person who was doing, a level 3 qualification at college, and he hadn't seen an EP since he was in preschool. So I think it would be really good if EPs were more involved in annual reviews, but the capacity kind of precludes that. And EPs will be prioritised for an annual review where there is deemed to be a need for that particular element. I think if things are going very well, if things are quite straightforward, usually we wouldn't be involved. But if things are quite tricky or the needs have changed quite substantially, then that is when we might be. I hope that helps.
Yes, it does. Also, so in the part of the HCP plan, which is social, can an educational psychologist help with the outcome of keeping friends? So especially with children with autism, let's just say if a child has a friend, how can they keep that friend, and how could that be an outcome within the EHCP plan?
Okay, so obviously it will be different for individuals, but kind of thinking about when I've written advice for a young person with autism, in terms of thinking about their friendships. So making and keeping friends is about building the skills. So, and it's also sort of working with the young person to make sure that they are the skills that they want to develop. But thinking, so it would be around, the phrasing of the outcome, my practice would be to co-produce the wording of that outcome with the young person and their family, and potentially some kind of ideas from staff that know that the young person very well. So the outcome for me was very much always co-produced. I know it will be different depending on the ways EPs practice, but I think the sort of provision that I would be recommending in such a situation would be around developing the skills for that individual young person to build those relationships and maintain those relationships. So for example, conflict resolution skills, but it's also about providing, adults around that young person, noticing and supporting and guiding both the young person and also their friends, so sort of doing some of that sort of supportive mediation, I suppose. So that the way EPs work is to think about the individual, but then also think about their contexts. So for a young person who's finding friendships challenging, it will be about skills and kind of tolerance for that young person, but also skills and tolerance from other young people, and also the adults more broadly, kind of providing the support and stepping in and mediating and guiding and helping practice as well. So it's really difficult because obviously individuals will be different, but that is a kind of general gist.
Yeah, it's just that, you know, in COVID, you saw a lot of mental health decline within children with special needs, purely because of no contact with the community, friends and family. Well, unfortunately, for most of our children and young adults, that is a challenge for when they eventually leave education services. So what I also wanted to ask you was, can we ask for a review of an existing EHCP plan if there is nothing within the social side of their EHCP plan to get these outcomes?
So if the I mean, if the outcomes are in the plan, then there should
They're
be
not.
provision. Okay, so they're not there. So that would be
So
raise
can we
raise
ask for
that
a
at,
review?
yeah, so raise that at the annual review. So you know, the options available are to amend the annual review, and which can be done, you know, quite, I think, in quite an easy way, because there's a clear cut need. You know, there's a clear way to support that young person to address that need. I think that could be happening at an annual review. But if there are more kind of significant shifts, a reassessment is also a possibility. I say that in a kind of sense of panic, because that's another statutory report for an EP out there. But that is the reality, that it can be addressed at annual review, but a reassessment may also be requested if the needs have changed significantly. But I think although it is clearly a clear omission, I would imagine it could easily be included and added to, and I think the response to supporting a young person to develop skills and build and maintain their friendships is a relatively straightforward one. I know schools may disagree with me, but I think it is very possible to do.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wanda.
Thank you very much.
Okay, there's just a comment from Jane in the chat, which I'll just read out. Effective communication with families is vital throughout the annual review and the HCP process. Partnership with parents can happen regardless of capacity to attend. If system, sorry, I can't read that last word. System. Can someone else read it?
Sorry, I'm just
If
looking
system
through.
is in place, it
In
says
place.
if the system is in place.
If the system is
Yes.
in place, thank you. And then there's another one which says ed psych and clinical psychologists can be working from different models, which impacts on outcomes for. I've got
young
sorry,
person.
For young person.
for the young person. Again, communication is vital. I'm sorry, I've got a share this window thing on top of my chat, Kate. So I'll leave those to you.
That's okay. I was just going to say there was a follow-up to the earlier question as well about encouraging schools to use the service. So I was just going to read that one out, if that's okay. So also, schools may not see the need for EP intervention, believing it's a discipline issue with the child. Again, it's how does the EP service raise their profile? Do you link in with head teacher forums rather than as well as Senko forums?
So yes, so I'm sure it will be different in local authorities, but yes, the EPs will be talking to head teachers as well. So usually, ordinarily the service is headed up by a principal educational psychologist, so a PEP, and they would often be talking to head teachers. But some kind of school-based EPs will be talking directly to the head teachers as well as to the Senkos. So the Senko circle is about supporting the Senkos. But yes, there will definitely be, you know, so head teacher meetings. We will deliver talks, for example, you know, because they have frequent kind of head teacher meetings. We will be sending out comms to head teachers about what we do. I think, you know, even also some local authorities will be delivering training to governors. So of course, governors also have a role to play in how kind of resources are, you know, kind of divvied out in schools. So we do that. But yes, it's not a perfect perfect world, and we can imagine what that would be like, but we do our best to make sure that that's that we're understood, that we understood in terms of all the different things that we can do.
Great, thank you. Anybody else want to ask a question? I think we are getting towards the end of the session now. I think there is just a hand up there. Hosan, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. You'll have to correct me.
Yes, you are. Yeah, that's
good.
fine.
Good. Thank you.
I had a question about reasonable adjustments, because that's come up a lot in conversations with our families. And it seems that it's a really, really grey area. And I think it's partly because there's a lack of specificness in EHCPs, so I don't think that helps. But how can the EP service kind of like, well, or how could you suggest ways in which an EP can help define what reasonable adjustments are for each child? Or even if you look at a big list, it's really hard to find on a government level what constitutes reasonable adjustments exhaustively, because it's all dependent on each child. But it's really hard, I think, for our parents to kind of sometimes access the things that they feel could be done, because the schools are nervous about doing it without in a way, without EP support or a professional. I think they need almost paperwork to say we're allowed to do that, rather than being able to make their own decisions. So I wondered if you had any suggestions on how, as a PCF, we could work with the EP service, or any experience that you have in your previous work that could help around this, make this grey area a bit clearer.
Yeah, I think the challenge is around it also being individualized, because I think human beings are so complex that what's right for one child is not going to be right for everybody. But I think there is something around kind of levels of what could be possible. So in terms of reasonable adjustments, that's a kind of legal term from the Equalities Act. And so that schools should be providing reasonable adjustments according to the Equalities Act, in terms of actually, if somebody needs something, then it's the law to provide what is reasonable. And that reasonable is kind of a balance between what is needed and what the school can provide. So that's sort of a legal kind of conversation, which EPs wouldn't necessarily be involved with. But we would be involved in sort of thinking about what is appropriate for this young person. And I think there's also this difference between what is ordinarily available provision, so things that schools should be expected to be providing without something like an EHCP, but then things that are over and above that would then be required to be provided by, through an EHCP. So there's, I don't think I'm clearing the grey here. I'm probably making it more muddled. That sort of distinction, I believe, following the SEND and AP improvement plan that the DfE has published, I think they are trying to make that much clearer, so that there is a very clear kind of offer locally around, this is the ordinarily available stuff and this is what's extra. But I think, regarding the specificity, which is one of those very challenging words to say, as an EP, I've found that very challenging to kind of specify some things, because it also needs to be responsive to the individual young person. So for example, a young person who finds has good days and bad days, so for mental health issues, for example, or maybe chronic fatigue, on a good day, they might be really, in a secondary school, might actually want no adult near them whatsoever. because they want to be with their mates and look cool and so on. But on another day, when they're having a bad day, they want to be in the inclusion unit or the, safe space, whatever they call it in their school, with an adult one-to-one. So it's sort of, becomes quite challenging to be individual as well as specific. But I think you can, if on an individual basis, if there isn't enough clarity in the plan that a parent carer can feel confident that their child's need will be met, you can then kind of go back to the SEN department and say, please clear this up. Or, through an annual review, perhaps say, actually, this isn't clear enough. The school hasn't delivered the outcomes nowhere near being, we're nowhere nearer the outcome. So therefore, can we please look at this provision again and make it more specific?
Okay,
don't
so
know
does that mean that we should suggest to our parents to raise this an annual review and say, say for example, there's some, I mean, there's two examples I can use here. One is about, well, they're both about sensory issues, and one is about, well, not having to wear a swimming hat during swimming. I know it's a really small thing, but schools seem to have a very clear idea that everybody must conform, and kind of like, there's no swimming if you're not wearing the right uniform, and we daren't let one child not wear a swimming hat, because then all children might, they might, all anarchy might suddenly, it might all go crazy. And so there's some kind of things around uniform there, and I think it's quite difficult, because it really does feel like the schools don't, they're almost too scared to make a child look different in any way, yet those things, something as simple as not wearing a hat and not having the pressure placed on them for wearing a hat, can make a huge difference to whether they go in the pool or not go in the pool. So it's something as daft as that. I mean, would that be a conversation we suggest that our parents raise?
I think a conversation on that level shouldn't need to wait for the annual review. I think that's and it's really difficult to say, but I think, this is a personal opinion in case it kind of gets me into trouble, but something like that, that is a very easy adjustment to make. It's entirely reasonable. If the young person is saying, I don't want to look different, I want to wear this hat, that's a different conversation. But if the young person is saying, this is really uncomfortable, I do want to swim, but I can't bear the feeling of that hat on my head, and I assume it would be probably an occupational therapist or somebody, with sensory expertise, has said that hat is not helpful. I think it's discrimination. So it would be going into that legal equalities element potentially. And so it's a conversation to be had with the head teacher as soon as possible, to say this isn't really fair.
Okay. I think the issue that you've mentioned, like an OT mentioning that, and it might not necessarily be the case that an OT always gets involved at that level, or a child has been seen at the needs assessment, which was years and years ago, before they ever were in a situation where they were swimming, for example. So I think there's again, there's that difficulty, because then the parent has to advocate, and the school it then becomes this is our uniform policy, and that's really hard. But yeah, okay, so we'll suggest that they go back and speak.
Yes. And there should be kind of organizations, sort of local organizations, who will advocate on behalf of parents and carers as well. So I know, kind of through Contact a Family, but also there'll be local organizations, because I know it can be quite difficult to go to the head teacher and say, look, this isn't on.
Yes,
I think
Cath, Yeah,
Yes, who's
I
going
was
to let
just
people
going to
know?
say that. I mean, obviously, the IS service is the place for forums to signpost parents to for advice and information, because that that's relevant. And also,
Okay.
Helen's just put up the contact website. So of course, Contact provides a helpline, lots of online ways of getting information. Our website's got loads of information and about your rights, etc. There's also, if you're really struggling, there's a listening ear service, so you can have book in a half an hour appointment. So I'd really encourage forums to tell parents about Contact as a source of support, information and advice, and also to sign up to a newsletter so they find out about other support available, workshops, etc., things may be happening in their area. So yeah, just wanted to kind of flag to signpost to other organizations. Forums can't do it all.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Prosan.
I think we've run a little over time, so it's been really lovely being able to speak to you. I think if there are further questions, I imagine there may be some opportunities to forward them on to me, maybe. But
Yeah.
I'll do my best
Thanks so
to
much,
to answer them. It's sort of with the caveat that I can't give specific advice, and of course all places and spaces will be operating in different ways. But it's been really lovely kind of being here, and thank you for inviting me, and I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, thank you so much, Cath, and thank you to everybody that's come on today, and especially those of you who've participated. It would be amazing if you could fill in the feedback form that will get automatically emailed to you, and Helen's put a reminder about that in the chat. And yes, contact us if and use our main offer and signpost families to it, because it is hard, and if all those sort of issues that people are mentioning, they are really common, and sometimes you just need somebody to talk to as well, to try and think about how are you gonna push this forward in your own family, don't you? So we are here, and thank you to everybody.
Great, thank you.